rigorous testing that's ever been done in the history of agriculture. In order to get a crop released for human consumption in the farmers, you have to go through at least 10 years of testing and about $100 million in cost. This is in fact one of the reasons why the corporations are the only ones that can afford to put them out there. I wish that wasn't the case. Public institutions don't have the ability to be able to do that because of the regulatory costs in terms of the testing so high. But conventional crops don't undergo any testing whatsoever. So a genetically engineered crop, or one like an Arctic apple which is going to come on the market, or genetically engineered potatoes, has to go through FDA, USDA, EPA approvals. Regardless of who's doing it or not, it's going through regulatory agencies, which is just as strict as getting drugs to go onto the market. But a conventional crop doesn't have to go through any testing whatsoever. And so here's the point. If I in my lab, and I don't do this, but if I in my lab wanted to conventionally breed for a peanut, let's say, that had 10 times the amount of allergen that the peanuts that you might buy at Dodger Stadium, I could do that and I could sell it to farmers. They could grow it, they could be used for food for consumption without any regulation. But if I wanted to make a hypoallergenic peanut which has been made in a laboratory and clinically tested at 0 allergens, so that no one would go into anaphylactic shock if they ate that peanut, would have to go through 10 to 15 years of testing. So it doesn't make any sense in terms of what this regulatory framework is. There's many foods that we eat that are conventional: shrimp, peanuts, soybean, wheat, that have allergens and other things, because these are things that plants have evolved and animals have evolved to fight off things over thousands and thousands of years. And frankly, there's no food that you buy in a grocery store, I don't care whether it's Whole Foods or Ralph's or Vons, that hasn't been genetically engineered, which means manipulating genes. And it doesn't matter whether you do it conventionally or with DNA technology, it's exactly the same thing.
I know that you want to respond to that, sure, Dave, and I'm sure that a lot of the folks in the audience have questions that are related to what you both want to talk about. We do have some time remaining, so where's our wireless microphone? If you've got a question that you would like to address to either both speakers or one or the other, put your hand up and
right here.
Tracy will go. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh man. He was
if
first.
You can identify, say who you are, where you're from, and what's your question.
Okay, my name is Lauren Steiner. I'm an activist and organizer, and my bias, just to tell you, is I recently held a citizen lobby meeting at Dianne Feinstein's office, trying to get her to vote against the DARK Act. But lobbying her on anything that benefits the people is a waste of time. Anyway, I have a question for you, because you made 2 points that I would like to know if you really are sure you mean. Do you not concede that science is political, that scientists have their research funded by corporations, that universities have their research funded by corporations, that something isn't even considered accepted science unless it's published in a journal that is peer-reviewed, et cetera, et cetera? There's politics all throughout science. Second of all, regulatory agencies are completely captured by industry. I also fight fracking, and we have seen the EPA, we've seen the Obama administration withdraw 3 EPA studies proving that fracking harms drinking water. So, and for you to use the FDA as an example, okay, the FDA has released all sorts of drugs.
Okay, what was the first question?
I want to know if you really are trying to tell us that there's no politics involved in science, and if you really think that we should trust our regulatory agencies.
Thank you for your question. Is there politics in science?
That's a really complicated question. First of all, I don't take any money from corporations for my research. Most research in genetic engineering at a basic level is funded by the federal government. So all of my funding over the last 45 years is from the National Science Foundation. And so, secondly, I think that when you talk about science being political, when I look at data objectively. And I look at what the numbers say, and I'm not thinking about whether the numbers are Democratic or Republican or corporate or whatever. It's neutral. And so I'm here as a scientist. I'm not here to solve the political problems of the world or the United States. Most of what science does is objectively look, ask questions, objectively look at the numbers, and formulate hypotheses and formulate reasons for what we see in the laboratory. And we hope that at some particular point what we do is going to be helpful for humanity. And I think that's really the record that science stands on. As I said, I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I do know people who do work for the EPA. I know people who work for the USDA. And I know the scientists that work there. And I know they're pretty honest, hard-working people. And so that's the only way that I can respond to your question. Because
thank you, Bob, for responding to that.
I'd love to respond to this. Okay, listen. You know, I'm not here to insult Bob. Listen, I appreciate your work as a scientist. I appreciate your work as a teacher, because that's very important. We have a fundamental disagreement about how science and technology work in our society. That's what we're discussing. So I believe that the political process has been rigged and captured against the American public. And I have evidence for this. We have basic documents right here. There's 2 documents that I have. One is talks about Monsanto basically said should not have to vouchsafe for the safety of biotech foods. This is what the director of corporate communications said. So Michael Pollan was playing God in the garden. This is the New York Times in 1998. Our interest is in selling as much of it as possible. Assuring its safety is the FDA's job. So you might think that that's a reassuring statement, and that could be technically correct. Well, the response from the FDA's own policy directive is ultimately it's the food producer who's responsible for assuring safety. So I mean, you have so the FDA says no, it's the food manufacturer, food manufacturer. So there is a corruption of science. So again, I love original documents. I love to look through the EPA scientists and figure out what they were talking about when they were figuring out this regulatory process. In the 1990s, there was a lawsuit by the Alliance for Biointegrity and Center for Food Safety against the federal government. I think it's Alliance for Biointegrity versus Shalala, who was the head of the Department of Health at that time. But basically what it shows, 40,000 pages of EPA internal documents were released, and we do have the thought process of these FDA scientists at the time. And I think it's very important. Bob just brought up the point that traditionally bred crops or hybridized crops, they have no different risk than a genetically engineered crop. And I'll just say, the FDA's own scientists found this laughable. The process, this is what they said, FDA compliance officer, the process of genetic engineering and traditional breeding are different, and according to the technical experts in the agency, they lead to different risks. This is not a new statement. This has been public for 20 years. And so what they did is they brought in Michael Taylor, a food safety lawyer, who worked for Monsanto and helped write the regulations, and so they papered it over. They said, you have to understand the law and the regulations on genetic engineering, why we don't have basic transparency and labeling in food, is because Monsanto and the biotech industry rigged it from the very beginning. They created something, they had basically a legal policy theory in DC in the 70s that was used on medical devices. It was called substantial equivalence. So you have a non-biological entity, a machine being created by medical manufacturers. They wanted to declare them substantially equivalent. They took that doctrine and they brought it over to the process of our food. Now the process of genetic engineering is not precise, like some scientists were like how they originally genetically engineered crops. They had they used a gun to shoot the gene gun to shoot the genes through the cell. So there's not a precise, delivery.
Actually, that's absolutely untrue.
So they didn't use a gene gun.
Not true.
They didn't use a gene gun.
Yeah, but we know exactly where those genes go.
Exactly.
We know the chemical structure of those genes. We know what the sequence is. We know where they're active, where they're inactive. There's nothing that I don't know about the genes that I put in my plants. I know precisely exactly where they go.
But I'm talking about GMO crops,
and
corn
GMO,
and soy,
wait a second.
created by Monsanto.
No, GMO crops, they know exactly where those genes are. They know where they land. They know how they're expressed. They know whether they're active in the leaf, whether they're active in the root, whether they're active in the fruit. They know the level that they're active. They know exactly. It follows for generation after generation after generation after generation. They behave exactly like any other gene. The fact of the matter is that's not true. I mean, it's absolutely false.
Keep talking.
Let's say that.
I'd like to respond to that. So I do risk assessments of the situation in food and agriculture. So I'll just say, So he's going to say that it's absolutely precise. There's no potential problem.
Well, why don't you come to my lab and I'll show you?
I'll be happy to come to your lab.
Seriously, and I can show you how to use the technology too.
The conversation here is they're not precise.
And wait a
not
second.
absolutely precise.
The recent report by the National Academy of Sciences. No, the recent well, you filibustered before. The recent report by the National Academy of Sciences said
talking points.
that they're saying I don't have talking
okay,
points.
so here we go. Bob, let me finish the conversation that I was saying. So the fact is, he's going to say they're absolutely precise. There's no problems here. The fact is, there are some issues here. There really are. So scientists have shown, I mean, I've read the original documents with submissions to the USDA. The drought-tolerant corn that they submitted, in the original document submitted by Monsanto to the USDA and the FDA for approval, it showed that they had a missing sequence of genes that they couldn't account for. They had a missing sequence. So again, there's absolute precision in his mind and the Academy of Natural Science, but when you look at the documents, it's not factually borne out. So a few years ago, the cauliflower mosaic virus that's used as a promoter gene. Anyway, so there's real concerns about leaks in this genetic cassette that's inserted into plants. And I know that, you know, Bob, I'm not questioning your integrity as a scientist. I'm not doing that. I'm not questioning integrity but I do question the integrity of some of these other genetically engineered crops that weren't produced in your laboratory.
You can't. Look, I'd like to change the discussion a little bit to something more productive. Genetic engineering is a tool. The science that we have today, I could take any skin cell from anybody in this audience and up here, and I could sequence your genome in about 2 hours with the precision of absolute 100% accuracy. The science is so advanced. We know what we're doing with these things. It is so precise. It's not like it was